orientation. The decision is very brief, Mr. Chairman. The next presenter, or the first presenter on this particular session is Distinguished Senator Zonal, who holds 2 national honors, Officer of the Federal Republic OFR and Commander of the Order of the Niger CON. He was born on the 8th of March 1956 in Ikom, Cross River State. He has an LLB honors from the University of Lagos 1977 and an LLM from the University of Calabar. He was called to the Nigerian bar in 1978. He extensively practiced law in all the superior courts of record for several years and held several appointments at the state level. He was elected as senator in the 5th Assembly that is 2003-2007, representing Cross River Central Senatorial District. He served as the chairman of the Senate Committee on Media and Public Affairs in the 5th Senate, deputy Senate leader in the 6th Senate, and Senate leader in the 7th Senate. He holds 2 national honors, like I stated earlier, that is the Officer of the Order of the Federal Republic and the Commander of the Order of the Niger. Distinguished Senator Zonal is a senior advocate in Nigeria. Let's welcome him with a big round of applause and praise the Lord.
Okay, yes, beg your pardon. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that point of correction. The topic of the day, or the topic to be presented by Distinguished Senator Zonal is innovativeness in designing national solutions to constituency development. Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the correction.
The chairman of this session, the very famous Alhaji Tanko Yakasai, very distinguished and very honorable members, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by thanking the chairman for exercising his very first power in my favor. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. My topic is innovativeness in designing national solutions to constituency development. Again, I will thank the Nigerian Institute for Legislative Studies and the Speaker of the House of Reps for the very kind invitation extended to me to be part of this summit. I start my paper by indicating that constituencies, whether they be senatorial constituencies or federal constituencies, are creations of the Constitution. It's Section 47 of the Constitution and Section 49. And now, whether constituencies are expected to be developed, the obvious answer is yes. And I referred us to Part 2 of the 1999 Constitution. That is the part dealing with fundamental objectives and directive principles of state policy, and specifically referred to the provisions of Section 16. Section 16 deals with the economic objectives of the Constitution, and in summary, the economic objectives contemplate that every aspect of Nigeria will enjoy development. Therefore, the same Constitution that creates constituencies contemplates that these constituencies will be developed. I talked a bit about the nature of the fundamental principles, fundamental objectives and directive principles of state policy. I won't need to bore you with that. Now, I have said that the Constitution, therefore, envisages the economic development of every constituency in the country. It is the intention or objective of the Constitution that every constituency and its constituents benefit from the economic policies of government, that they benefit from the opportunities and resources of the nation fairly and equally. Having established this constitutional expectation, the question becomes, how can the objective and ideal of the development of every constituency be achieved? The first way, of course, is the national budget. The Constitution provides that the President shall cause to be prepared and laid before each House of the National Assembly at any time in the financial year estimates of the revenue and expenditure of the Federation for the next financial year. The heads of expenditure contained in the estimates, other than expenditure charged to the Consolidated Revenue Fund by the Constitution, shall be included in a bill to be known as the Appropriation Bill, providing for the issue from the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the sums necessary to meet the expenditure and the appropriation of those sums for the purposes specified there. I have referred us to Section 81 of the Constitution. All revenues other than monies raised or received by the Federation, not being revenues or other monies payable under the Constitution or any act of the National Assembly, into any other public fund of the Federation established for a specific purpose, shall be paid into and form one consolidated revenue fund of the Federation. No money shall be withdrawn from the consolidated revenue fund of the Federation except to meet expenditure that is charged upon the fund by the Constitution, or where the issue of those monies has been authorized by an appropriation act, supplementary appropriation act, or an act passed pursuant to Section 81 of the Constitution. No money shall be withdrawn from any public fund of the Federation other than the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the Federation unless the issue of those monies has been authorized by an act of the National Assembly. No money shall be withdrawn from the Consolidated Revenue Fund or any public fund of the Federation except in the manner prescribed by the National Assembly, Section 8. Now, why did I take the trouble to go through the provision? Whereas it has been beyond controversy who has the power to make proposals or estimates of revenue and expenditure, and that is the President. The nature of the proposals has been the subject of eternal debate. It has been observed that a budget is a series of goals with price tags. While some believe that the President's proposals are etched in rock, or are sacrosanct, or immutable, or in the nature of scripture, like the Bible or the Quran, others believe that the President's proposals or estimates are just proposals or estimates, that the power of appropriation resides with the National Assembly, and that that power is at large. In other words, the National Assembly can tinker with the President's proposals in any manner and to whatever extent it wishes. These arguments have been at the heart of the controversy concerning the budget process in Nigeria and especially the constituency project phenomenon. The arguments have defined and colored constituency projects. And I've made the point here, Assembly or State Assembly. But in ordinary usage, every project is a constituency project. Now, the argument as to the nature of powers of the President or the nature of his powers to prepare estimates or make proposals on the budget vis-a-vis the nature of the powers of the National Assembly or State Assembly over the budget have remained a very contentious issue. And until the Supreme Court pronounces on the nature and extent of the President's proposals or estimates vis-a-vis the powers of the National Assembly to appropriate, the argument will endure to the certain detriment of timely passage of budgets. In Nigeria, senatorial and federal constituency development is largely through the national budget. It is for this reason that the budget remains of considerable interest to both the executive and members of the National Assembly. Constituency projects are initiated by members of the National Assembly, but executed by the executive arm of government through the appropriate ministries, departments, or agencies in the same way that the capital project of the budget are implemented. President Yar'Adua's first budget in 2008, and may God rest his soul, was stalemated, and he indeed contemplated approaching the Supreme Court for an interpretation of the nature and extent of his powers in respect of the budget in relation to the National Assembly, but was constrained by time, as realistically a judgment of the Supreme Court was unlikely before the end of June, up to when he could constitutionally use the previous year's budget in running government. If you recall, in 2008, the budget was passed, I think, around the middle of June, and that was because late President Yar'Adua insisted that the proposals he brought to the National Assembly must be treated as sacrosanct. It took a series of negotiations, and by the grace of God, I was part of those negotiations because I was then Deputy Senate Leader. It took a number of negotiations and an appreciation of the reality that constitutionally you can use the previous year's budget only to the end of June, in the next year. After that, the Constitution is silent. What happens if we get beyond June and there's no Constitution for that year? The Constitution makes no provisions. So we'll just draw from the experience elsewhere. And I use the experience of the United States of America. And I'm sure we are all familiar with the story of Monica Lewinsky. How did Monica Lewinsky become famous? She became famous because Congress and President Bill Clinton couldn't agree on the budget until it got to the terminal date for the use of the budget, and there was what you call in the US system a budget meltdown. Government could no longer pay for services, so it got volunteers to come and run the essential services of government. And that was how Monica Lewinsky got into the picture. What happened after that? The senator from the United States will tell us. You know, in our own case, there is, like I said before, there is no provision in the Constitution as to what happens after June. Now, when President Yar'Adua contemplated going to the Supreme Court to get an interpretation of the President's power regarding the budget, his attention was drawn to the fact that given the rules of the Supreme Court, he could not expect any judgment from the Supreme Court before the end of September of that year. Between the end of June and the end of September, what do you do? It was this crisis that even gave us an... The projects should, as much as possible, be projects that fall within the responsibility of the federal government. In the choice of projects, do not compete for projects with states and local governments. One of the challenges of speaking after so many speakers is that what you are going to say probably would have been said by earlier speakers. And I wasn't here when the Minister for National Budget and Planning presented his paper, but from the questions that were asked, I could deduce that he had made allusions to some of this. Now, later on in this paper, we will see why it is important that for federal legislators, that is senators and members of the House of Representatives, why it is important for them to choose projects that are in line with a federal plan. We'll come to that, and the reason will become very obvious. I have also in this paper mentioned alternative strategies for funding constituency projects. The Speaker of the Parliament of Kenya spoke extensively about the methods they have adopted, the Constituency Development Fund in Kenya. You have that method in Kenya, you have in India, you have in Uganda, you have in several other countries. So that is one strategy. And I learned today that Lagos State also has a similar arrangement. Another strategy is self-help. in which the representative mobilizes his constituents to carry out projects, development projects in the constituency through their own initiative, through their own resources, and through their own efforts. Another strategy is the personal initiative of the representative. Because for me, holding an elected office is perhaps the highest honor any people can do to anybody. And if you have been so honored, the least you can do, apart from serving them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks in a year, is to also deploy your resources to their service. It's like a personal social responsibility effort. And this could come in a number of ways. You could have a scholarship scheme, you could have a computer appreciation scheme, you could have a transportation scheme, you could have so many schemes, but these will be funded directly from your own personal resources. Another strategy, of course, is to approach corporate bodies, donor agencies, and international organizations. I cooperated with MTN, just like I did with British American Tobacco, and I was able to attract some projects to my constituency. Now, I have also talked in the paper about resolving the argument over who has powers and the nature of these powers over the budget. I said, since the funding for constituency projects in Nigeria is largely through the national budget, innovativeness of creativity has to be around the budget process. For reasons of the arguments earlier mentioned regarding the nature and extent of the President's powers vis-à-vis the National Assembly regarding the budget, innovativeness will have to be around A, how to resolve the arguments, B, conceptualizing constituency projects so that they are federal in nature and character and fit them into national economic and development planning when it decided to domicile constituency projects in a specific ministry, that is the Ministry of Special Duties. Operating and managing constituency projects. Identifying constituency projects, imputing them into the budget, financing and executing them to completion are only one challenge. Managing, operating, and maintaining them are another challenge altogether. The latter challenge stems essentially from how constituency projects originate and their ownership. Usually, the representative identifies and chooses the constituency project, and he or she does this independently without recourse to the relevant ministries, departments, or agencies on how the project fits into the national plan, and almost always without consultation with the constituents. Constituency projects are identified, not conceptualized, without follow-through plans, because neither the MDAs nor the constituency was involved in the identification or selection of the projects. And because they were not involved, there is no owner of the project. The representatives stay in the National Assembly like life itself is finite. It will necessarily come to an end one day. When his or her sojourn ends, the project becomes completely orphaned. And this is so because in the National Assembly, unlike the executive arm, we do not have handing over notes. Your predecessor, when his term ends, just takes his personal effects and leaves the assembly. He hands over nothing. And because there are no handing over notes, the successor doesn't even get to know which projects his predecessor was handling. And that is the reason why we have uncompleted and derelict constituency projects littering the landscape. Now, I have talked about the way forward. One, ownership. To ensure functionality and maintainability, projects must have ownership. For constituency projects, the ownership has to be twofold. The project must fit into the national plan of the MDAs, and it must have the buy-in of the constituency, so that both can take responsibility for the operations and maintenance of the projects. The need for the representatives to have the MDAs and the constituency engaged in constituency projects has become evident for their sustainability. 2. Continuity. To minimize abandonment and dereliction of constituency projects, continuity, and by continuity here I mean continuity of the projects, is critical. A strategy for synergy and cooperation between the outgoing and incoming parliamentarian or representative is critical. They must see beyond the immediacy of politics to the enduring legacies for their constituencies. In my conclusion, I have said, until a court makes a pronouncement on the nature and extent of the President's powers in relation to the budget, vis-à-vis the powers of the National Assembly over the same, and I pray such a day never comes. That is a day that the court has to make a pronouncement. Because the budget is not just an economic tool. The budget is also a political tool. And political matters should be left within the political realm for resolution. I don't advise, even as a lawyer, I do not advise people to take political questions to the court. Because when you go to court, they end with such finality that leaves you with little or no room for further future dialogue. So I don't pray that day comes. But since it's a political tool, dialogue and cooperation between the executive and legislative arms will be the most effective means of dealing with the arguments, as compromise will be the only key to the budget process. Identifying, choosing, or determining a constituency project and imputing same into the national budget is just one challenge. Getting the project operational and maintained in a sustainable and enduring manner is perhaps even a greater challenge to overcome. Now, for us to get by this, ownership of and a sense of responsibility over the project is key. The MDAs and the constituency the project seeks to serve should be part of every process, from the conceptualization to its final execution. The operation, maintenance, and ownership of the project should be part of that conceptualization. The sustainability of the project is what defines a constituency project. That is, when the project is put to effective use for the benefit of the community. To achieve sustainability, egos must be shared, and every person useful to the success of the project must be engaged. Engagement is the key, and that is what I recommend to this August summit. Thank you once again to DJ and the Speaker of the House of Representatives for this opportunity.
Thank you so very much, Distinguished Senator Victor Ndoma-Ekpa. Chairman, any comment?
Definitely, the presentation by the Senator has thrown quite a lot of light, innovation,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before Professor Sam takes the podium, permit me to state that this is a joint presentation, and it is to be, the joint presentation is by Dr. Ladi Hamalai, Mafadi, Mills, and Professor Sam and indeed Professor is going to make the presentation on behalf of the two of them. So, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, let me read the recitation of Professor.
Lucas representing Luca.
Thank you. Professor Samuel Ego is a professor of political science from the University of Jos. He was previously UNDP's team leader on governance and peace building. As team leader, he managed UNDP's DGD's support to Nigeria's electoral democracy, electoral cycle approach, and deepening democracy under the aegis of the Democratic Governance for Development (DGD) project, as well as the successful implementation of the first phase in support of the 2011 general election. He won a number of fellowships in the course of academic career, which is a testimony of his hard work and diligence. These include the West African Research Fellowship WARA, Program of African Studies, Northwestern University, Illinois, Chicago, USA, in 1995, Research Fellow, Center for Advanced Social Science for Harvard, 1996, and guest researcher, the Nordic Africa Institute, Uppsala, Sweden, in 1997. He was a member of the Political Conference Committee in 2014, and currently a political professor in the University of Jos. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Professor Samuel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will go straight to my presentation. I just want to say that Dr. Ladi Hamalai, the DG, and myself initially agreed on a division of labor, but just 1 hour ago, we took a joint decision that I present this alone. So that is why I'm speaking to this paper alone. The second point is that I've been here since morning, and if you ask me, even if we choose to go home now, the real objective of this summit has already been met in terms of the issues that have been raised since morning. So I think what my presentation and Ladi Hamalai and any other one will be doing is to amplify in some other ways what has been said already. And particularly after listening to the opening speech by the speaker and the presentation by the speaker of the Kenya Parliament, I have a feeling that 50% of the task I'm supposed to perform already has been performed. So I'm not going to engage in unnecessary repetition. But I think there are two things that have come out from morning and will also come out in my presentation. One of them is what people increasingly in the literature now refer to as the ideology of CDS. In other words, the whole phenomenon of constituency project is gaining worldwide acceptance and recognition, that people, in fact, think that it has become an ideology, in a very important sense. The second point that comes out, which I think I will also amplify in the course of our presentation, is that we are actually celebrating the visibility of the legislature increasingly in the policy and decision-making process. And for those of us who have read a lot in the literature on the emerging legislature in Africa, we are actually at a particular juncture in the history of Africa where the legislature is not a mere rubber stamp anymore and is increasingly becoming a key player in terms of allocating resources. And I think this is what we cannot run away from in terms of the issues that have been raised. So The essence of my presentation, therefore, will be to actually look at the comparative, evidence in order to reinforce what we have said already. I think I forgot here. Okay. Very quickly, as I said, I will not be repeating what has been said before. So I'll speak from this part of my introduction, taking off from the point of what I call the ideology of CDS. It's a recognition that many democracies now have this in place. The count that I did of one of the papers that was done in 2014 suggests that about 20 democracies have constituency projects where parliaments make input into certain projects that are implemented in their constituency. And I've also realized, looking at the literature, that whereas in 1990 there were 3 countries that had functional constituency projects, in place, the number has grown from 3 in 1990 to 19 in 2010, and by 2014 we have more countries doing this. I was also looking at the Global Parliamentary Report of 2012, which was done by UNDP and IPU. And what they said is that increasingly constituency projects are recognized as one of the 4 elements of constituency services provided by legislators. But however, there are common concerns, and they have been raised since morning. I'll just mention those that are key. One concern is about accountability and effectiveness. I think Senator Undoma has spoken about that. There's also a concern, if you read the literature, that these practice of constituency projects tend to reinforce existing patronage network, particularly in Africa. And the third one is that it turns MPs away from their core functions of legislation to become concerned with decision-making issues. And I think we have enough counter argument to that. But what I think we will do in our presentation is to highlight using some countries in terms of what structures and arrangements are in place for implementing CDFs. And that is what I think I will put a lot of my energy into. But before that, I just want to say that if you read the literature, there are 4 key elements of what we generally define as constituency projects or constituency development funds. One of them is that we are dealing with projects that are identified by the legislator of the host constituency, acting in parliament or in a particular committee to attract this project to his or her constituency. Number 2, usually they are designed, funded, and executed with some participation or collaboration of the legislator in the process. The third element or attribute is that constituency projects are directly funded from the budget of the central or state government. And finally, more often than not, they are projects that are identified with a particular legislator. Now, I just want to speak very briefly about the issue of whether it is really constitutional or legal. And if you look at the literature and the practice, the issues, the justification for putting constituency projects in place, the justifications are actually beyond the issue of constitution and legality. And I think attention is moving away. That is not to say it is not important, right? But I think there are more compelling factors. And I have identified some of them here. One of them, why you can't run away from it as a reality today, is the growing perception of legislators as development agents. People who elected them do not see them in terms of law-making function, narrowly speaking. They see them as people that will bring them development. And we have also realized that it is now a legitimate part of constituency service required of the legislator. And of course, there is the ultimately local nature of politics in Africa. In Africa, people are tied to their local place. And what they think of the legislator is what he's able to bring, which they can feel and touch. And in fact, whether you like it or not, the re-election of a legislator in this part of the world is like a referendum. You know, it's like really giving you a pass mark for your previous performance. So if you have nothing to say you have brought to the community, you are not likely to be elected. I think this is something that we can't run away from. But of course, we also know from the literature that people think it's even very legitimate, you know, to go in this direction, because more often than not, you have items in the budget that are never delivered because of bureaucratic bottlenecks. And the argument in favor of this is that a particular legislator interested in this will put in every energy to fast track and ensure that it is delivered. And where people are involved in identifying projects, there is better articulation of local needs and priorities. And that is more important than people sitting down in a boardroom in Abuja and deciding what a particular local government in Ondo would need. And of course, if you go on and on, you cannot run away from the fact that it helps give the legislator political visibility, you know, which, whether you will like it or not, is part and parcel of its entire profile. And of course, looking at evidence from many other democracies, including Kenya and Uganda, people actually think that constituents now think more in terms of collective goods than individual, you know, patronage that legislators can give. So if that is the case, then it will build legitimacy for the democratic process. And that is what we cannot run away from. Finally, I think in many countries where people are increasingly talking about decentralizing development, I think this has become one way of doing it and promoting it. Now, what I then decided, or we decided to do, is to show what the trends are in many democracies in terms of financial commitments and allocations to. I'm faster than my manipulation of this. I'm very sorry. Am I doing well? I'm sorry. Okay. Just to show across democracies what has been the financial commitment to constituency projects. I don't know if you can see very well from what I have projected, but if you look at the per capita distribution of funds per legislator, you will find out that in democracies like the Philippines, Kenya, Malaysia, India, each legislator actually gets more money in terms of constituency, you know, development projects compared to what you can see for Nigeria. And when you look at what is allocated to each legislator in all these democracies, relative to the population, you will find out that despite all the hues and cries in Nigeria, of the 5 democracies we have here, the money allocated to community projects is probably the lowest. And I think if we believe that this will be a very important instrument of, you know, achieving development in an equitable and even manner, probably we might think of the possibility of increasing support for constituency projects. I also have another table in the presentation which shows what has been the allocation in Nigeria from 2013 to 2016 to constituency projects. And what I find from the literature and the data there is that whereas countries like Kenya have 2.5 annually devoted to constituency projects, whereas countries like Ghana have 5%, and you find Nigeria having actually the highest is 2.03%. That's the highest allocation to constituency development projects. And so again, it is a list, in many of the countries in Africa. And the third table that I have, again, shows clearly in many democracies what you can put constituency funds for. And the evidence there is very clear. And I showed, for example, that in a country like Kenya, it is by law that you have to put the fund into healthcare, education, security, electricity, sanitation, water, and so on. And you have what different countries have. And I think the Nigerian case is also provided in the last column. And I think if you have the paper, you can look at the details. Now, let me quickly look at the models of community of CDFs that we have. I'm not going to speak about Kenya because that has been the focus of the Speaker of the Kenyan Parliament. I'll quickly go to my second example, which is Jamaica. And if you look at many countries that practice CDF, Jamaica is probably the most formalized, in terms of the practice, and it is the most professional model that ensures that each MP receives about $230,000 for development projects in the constituency. And if you look at the experience of Jamaica, since 2008, when it was created, the law is very clear that it is to enable parliamentarians to address the needs of their constituency. And in the case of Jamaica, it is recognized by government, including the executive, that this is one important way of spreading development to the community. In other words, there is support for it at the highest level of the executive. And it is a deliberate measure to empower members of parliament to respond to the needs of their constituents. And of course, what they then do in Jamaica is to have a very elaborate, structure and mechanism for delivering on constituency projects, including, first of all, a legislator required to put in place a 5-year development plan. Not only that, the 5-year development plan submitted by the legislator is often submitted to the focal desk in the office of the Prime Minister. And it's a requirement in their law that a legislator must consult with local people and NGOs in order to select projects to be implemented. And of course, ultimately the projects are approved by a cross-party committee, meaning that you are actually dealing with a body that is not just partisan. So the kind of project you are choosing must be one that can impact on the community. And of course, what they have done over the years is to continue to reform their system to make it better. So in 2009, they decided to create what they call Community Project Oversight Committees to ensure that in every constituency, projects have oversight mechanism from the beginning to the end. And I think that is one model that works. One interesting model, which we will not recommend, but I think which we need to share the experience, is that of Uganda. In the case of Uganda, CDF came on board in the year 2005, 2006, and it came from a series of discussions between the Prime Minister, Museveni, and the parliamentarians, where he agreed that he would help them, he would come to their assistance, to alleviate their suffering, because they kept, coming under pressure from constituents for this or for that. And in many instances, parliamentarians have to dip their hand into their private pockets to meet the needs of their constituents. And the president said, well, I'm going to help you. So they set up a parliamentary committee to develop the guidelines. But the unfortunate thing is that the guidelines developed or recommended was never approved, by Parliament in session. In other words, there is no express law, about how to implement constituency projects in Uganda. And the practice in Uganda is to pay the money directly into the bank account of the MP, of the member of parliament, who takes exclusive control. And the story that comes out of that, is that it is, attended to by corruption, diversion of funds, and people do not think it's a very good model, to recommend to any country. There are structures that are in place, but these structures do not have any legal backing. And I think it's on the basis of that coming back to Nigeria, the case which has been, which we have spoken about since morning, I think there are a lot of things that we can borrow from best practices around the world. And one of the major recommendations of our presentation is to really think that we need to move constituency projects in this country to a level where it should become part and parcel of our law and our constitution, so that we can have a framework that is elaborate to ensure accountability, transparency in their implementation, and also to build in some elements of sustainability. Of course, the point has been made this morning that Lagos provides the way in terms of what has been done in Nigeria, and I think we need, at the national level, to put that in place, but to place our energy in developing framework that will not simply make it the project of the legislator, but something that can be owned by the community, whose sustainability is guaranteed in the way in which the law prescribes the implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, I'd like us to please give him another resounding applause. Thank you so much. We're taking through the other presentations that are left. The next one, Mr. Chairman, is going to be looking at the diversity and content of legislative representation, challenges that legislators face in meeting the expectations of voters. To do this for this person, do us the honor of making this presentation, is a very experienced man who has been in this for a very long time and hails from Ghana, Dr. Rashid Draman. He has been actively engaged in institutional, parliamentary, and public financial management, evaluation, and governance issues for the past 15 years. He has carried out pioneering work with more than 30 parliaments in Africa, including the Pan-African and ECOWAS parliaments, and other parliaments around the world. In 2004, he set up the Parliamentary Center's Africa office in Accra, Ghana, set up the African Parliamentary Network on Poverty Reduction, and revived the African Parliamentarians Network Against Corruption, and APNAC, with the Secretariat based in Accra, Ghana. Dr. Draman also set up the West African Association of Public Accountants Committees, WAPAC, and currently hosts a secretariat in Ghana. He holds a PhD in political science from Carleton University and has taught courses on development and conflict at Carleton University and has been a guest lecturer at the Harvard University, Boston, Minneapolis. He has also served as a director of African programs at the Parliamentary Center between 2006 and 2013. Mr. Chairman, with your kind permission, would like to invite Dr. Rashid Draman for his presentation. He's a warm welcome to the podium for him with a round of applause.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Director General Mills. Thanks very much for the invitation to take part in this program today. Can I have the Yes, the focus of my presentation is going to be on the challenges that members of parliament face in meeting the expectation of voters, the expectation of your constituents. And like the previous speaker, I am going to skip a number of my slides because a lot of what I was going to say has been said already by the previous speakers. So I'm not going to belabor the point. And I know it's very late in the day. So I'll just focus on the key aspects of my presentation that would add some value to what we are discussing here today. I don't know whether you can see this, but I wanted to start with this data from the Interparliamentary Union, which shows on the one hand what members of parliament think their role is, and on the other hand what citizens and us voters think the role of our members of parliament should be. And clearly there's a discrepancy between what citizens think members of parliament should be doing and what members of parliament think they should be doing. We heard from the speaker this morning, the Speaker of the National Assembly. He talked about the fact that today voters would judge you not by the beautiful English that you speak on the floor of the House or by the kind of laws that you pass, but more by what you do at the constituency level and how they feel you at the constituency level. So I stand on that to say that I share a lot of sympathies with members of parliament because a lot of responsibilities are placed on you by the voters that you represent. And I think that there is a very strong case for some kind of fund that would help you meet some of those needs at the constituency level. But I think the important caveat is that these funds should be used with some serious guidelines that would define how those funds are used. People get into trouble with CDFs and constituency projects mostly because of challenges with corruption and how those funds are applied. I think that is where citizens begin to lose sympathy with members of parliament. But in situations where these funds are used according to law and they are dispersed in a way that shows equity and that shows fairness, I think there's a lot of sympathy and there's a lot of support for members of parliament to have these kinds of funds. I'm going to just jump to some of the challenges that I have identified in my paper, as well as based on the work that I have done with a number of parliaments around the continent, as some of the challenges that members of parliament face when it comes to your role as representatives of the people. I have two anecdotes that I want to share, and I'll be very brief on them. The first one is a town hall meeting that we held in a small village called Nchinji in Malawi a few years ago. And that town hall meeting was necessitated by the fact that citizens were of the view that members of parliament do not properly represent them, and members of parliament do not bring development to the constituency and so on, and they only see members of parliament when members are looking for their votes. So we had a town hall meeting and we brought citizens on one hand and members of parliament on the other hand and said, let's have a conversation and let's understand what the issues are. The citizens of that village said that when we vote for our members of parliament, the next time we see them is 4 years later when they are looking for our votes. Then we asked members of parliament to tell the citizens what the issues were and what the problems were that prevented them from coming back to the constituency and from doing constituency work. And what members of parliament said in Malawi, I think, was the same in terms of what we heard throughout the day. The Right Honourable Speaker of your parliament mentioned all the unreasonable demands that are placed on members of parliament. We heard from the Speaker of Kenya, we heard from other speakers. So members of parliament say, when we show up, our houses are turned into bursaries, our houses are turned into clinics, and so on and so forth. And then the response from the citizens was that, but that was what you told us when you wanted our votes. So we are only asking you to do what you said you were going to do. And I think this takes us back to some of what we heard again today, that I think often members of parliament are the ones who bring some of these challenges onto themselves. Because when you mount the platform to campaign, you get very excited and you start making promises and you start talking about things that in the end you can never deliver. Now the second anecdote that I have to share with you is some reflections of a Canadian MP. And this person happened to be my boss for many years. I worked with him and traveled with him across a number of countries in Africa. And he told me what we are seeing in terms of challenges faced by African members of parliament in addressing the needs of members of their constituents is the function of the station of most countries in development. And he said to me that his grandfather was a member of parliament in Canada at the beginning of the democracy in Canada, and that his grandfather faced similar challenges to what African members of parliament are facing. But when he became a member of parliament in the 90s, he did not face that kind of a challenge, because at that time Canada was a developed country, and when people come to him, I think they were talking more about influencing him to see how he can shape policy, how he can change legislation, and so on and so forth, and not the bread and butter issues that we see every day when it comes to members of parliament across our continent. So, based on these two reflections, I have developed a number of challenges that I think members of parliament face when it comes to meeting the expectations of voters and members of their constituencies. The first one, which has been spoken about, is the whole winner-takes-all mentality. And I wish the speaker from Kenya was here, because I have some story from Kenya to tell. In 2011, we launched a research study that we did in Kenya. And the study was on ranking African parliaments in terms of their performance. And the person who came to launch the report was the speaker from the Parliament of Kenya. Not this speaker, but the speaker before him. And he told us that CDFs came into being in Kenya mainly because of this phenomenon of winner-takes-all. And that the small percentage that is earmarked as CDF in Kenya has been able to do a lot in many constituencies than the 90-something% that is earmarked in the budget for development. He says to us, if your region is seen as opposition region, then believe it, you are not going to see any development throughout the tenure of that government. And so across a number of countries in Africa, I think these are some of the challenges that we see. And as a result, if you are a member of parliament, if you don't have any funding that's available to you to drive development that is addressing directly the needs of your people, then your region or your district is not going to see very much in development throughout the tenure of that government. Number two is what I describe as extreme partisanship and lack of political will when it comes to issues of oversight. And I say this because, you know, the reason why you go into a constituency and people are following members of parliament to deliver healthcare, to deliver education, and so on, is because members are failing in their oversight duties. Because where oversight works effectively and where resources go to the intended beneficiaries, to a large extent, the pressure on members of parliament is going to reduce, and voters are going to get what they deserve. Number three is the fact that in all the functions of members of parliament, in the function of lawmaking, in the function of oversight, I think these are functions that are performed within the House. And these are functions that if a member of parliament does not show up to perform his role by attending to the business of the House, I think there are sanctions that are meted out to members of parliament. When it comes to representation and work in the constituency, this is usually very, very silent when it comes to some of the laws that we have, either by standing orders or the constitution of our countries. So how to represent is not properly defined. And in addition to that, you don't also have resources allocated to members of parliament to effectively perform their representational duties in most countries across the continent. As a result, members of parliament who fail to show up, as per the example in Malawi, there is no mechanism of ensuring that they are compelled to show up and do their constituency work. And I believe the story is the same across many countries on the continent. Then following that is the next challenge, which is the issue of resources. I think we've heard a lot about that. And that is why we have all these allocations as constituency development funds, or whatever you call them in different jurisdictions. Most parliaments, most MPs across the continent still face the challenge of the fact that they do not have any resources at all allocated. And where resources are allocated, I think we have heard a litany of stories about how citizens are frustrated and disgruntled about how these resources are used by members of parliament. Number 5 is electoral systems. I think here the issue is, in most of our countries, we have single member districts, but in some countries you have some other systems, like the proportional representation and so on. And it's very difficult for members of parliament sometimes to identify themselves with particular districts and particular constituencies and particular projects. So that again brings out the challenge, and people get very frustrated in terms of the expectations that they have of their members of parliament. Number 6 is parliament-civil society relationship. And we heard today about the fact that here in Nigeria, civil society is one of the groups that has led the charge against members of parliament about how constituency projects are funded and so on. I think what is happening across the continent is that there is a lot of mistrust between elected representatives and civil society. But we find in our work that where the two groups work together, usually a good platform is created where issues of voters and citizens can be advanced, and this would inure to the benefit of members of parliament in the long run. But often this does not exist because of the mutual mistrust. Number 7 is media and parliament relationships. I think the media has a very important role to play in helping members of parliament in making the case for you when it comes to issues of CDS, when it comes to issues of constituency projects and so on. But often there is an antagonistic relationship between the media and Parliament. The Kenyan speaker is not here, but recently in Kenya, at one point, members of the media were banned from Parliament because of the antagonistic relationship between Parliament and the media. And this exacerbates the already difficult relationship that exists between the media and politics. Number 8 of the challenges is the issue of campaign finance and how that affects representation and how that affects how members of Parliament perform at the constituency level. And here I just want to emphasize the fact that today, in most countries, electoral outcomes are determined not by the ballot box, but by what somebody notes as banknotes. So money determines electoral outcomes and not the ballot box. And so when you have a situation like this, then in the end, it is the political players who determine what a member of Parliament should do. And the member of Parliament will listen more and do more to please the paymasters than the people that are supposed to have elected him or her. And the 9th challenge is what I describe as unrealistic expectations of voters. And I think the Right Honourable Speaker this morning captured it very well by talking about the fact that members of Parliament have been turned into ATMs. And in fact here I have it as they have been turned into walking ATMs. I think I narrated a story in Malawi, and I believe those of you from the state assemblies are very familiar with these issues. Every day you are confronted with all kinds of demands. So even where you have the CDF or where you have the constituency projects, I believe you are still not able to meet the expectations and the needs of the people that you represent because of sometimes the unrealistic expectations that there is on the part of voters. So I have some suggestions. And the first one is that I think that we need to bring some clarity to the issue of how you represent and how you develop and implement projects at the constituency level. So number one is that I think there is a need to legislate constituency development issues. Except for Kenya and for Uganda, I believe, I think across the continent, in most of our countries, the constituency projects just exist in name. There are no legal processes that guide how they are developed and how they are allocated and how they are used. Even in Kenya, which is the mecca of constituency development funds on the continent, I think we heard the challenges that they are going through, even up to this day, when people are taking Parliament to court in order to seek clarity. I think there's a need to bring some clarity, and I believe the efforts here in Nigeria are in the right direction. Number two is to clearly define the rules when it comes to how these funds are implemented. I think we heard from the professor just before me talking about the fact that Jamaica has one of the best rules in terms of how constituency development funds are used. I think it's important to have a bipartisan group that is devoid of any politics so that those resources can be used in a way that would give the best benefits to the people. Number three is that it's important that parliaments have a clear definition of what it means to represent, so that there are rules of engagement in terms of how MPs can engage their citizens. Because often the issue is not just simply taking money to the people. Sometimes just showing up and being with your people and discussing constructively how you can bring about development, I think is also a worthwhile initiative. But members of parliament who do not show up do not get penalized for not showing up, as compared to, for instance, getting penalized when you are absent from the house for a number of occasions. And number 4, and last but not least, is that we have to ensure that state institutions that have the responsibility to educate citizens about what the role of a member of parliament is and what the role of government is are properly given the needed resources and the mandate so that they can carry out this duty. Because from all that has been said today, from morning till now, I think one of the key challenges is the fact that sometimes voters do not properly understand the remit and properly understand the role and responsibilities of members of parliament. So a member of parliament aspiring can mount a platform and make promises that are not within the remit of his or her mandate. And I think that our voters need to be properly educated so that we can understand that these are the roles and responsibilities of members of parliament, so that when people come to make promises, at least we are able to differentiate between what is fact and what is fiction. So my final thoughts are that I think that it's important that in order for us, in order for citizens, I think there has to be fairness, there has to be equity, and there has to be very judicious use of our resources, so that everybody could get some little benefit from the democracy project. And thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Draman. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the last paper, but not the least of them, is to be presented by Senator Don Chora. Senator Don Chora was elected to the Illinois House of Representatives in 1988, was elected to the Illinois Senate in 1992. He serves as the chairman of the Powerful Appropriations Committee and is the chief budget negotiator for the Democrats. Chora ushered in Illinois' first comprehensive law banning assault weapons. He was also instrumental in creating and expanding the Keep Care Family Care and Senior Care Initiative by increasing the eligibility threshold. Over 270,000 children and their parents benefit from this initiative. He is also a strong advocate for drug affordability. Senator Chora sponsors the Safe Haven Act. This legislation allows parents of newborns to surrender their infants at hospitals, firehouses, and other safe havens without fear of criminal charges. This act saved many newborn lives. Nationally, Senator Chora is actively involved with the National Conference of State Legislators, the National Black Caucus of State Legislators. Senator Chora was born in Cairo, Illinois. He attended Chicago Public School. He graduated from the Chicago State University with a BA degree in political science, history, and is a graduate of Loyola University School of Law with a master's degree in health policy and law. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, distinguished Senator Chora is going to be presenting a paper on the senators' perception of their own role.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Chairman, members of the dais, honorable senators and members of Parliament, and of course my host from the National Institute of Legislative Studies. Thank you so very much. And I hope hope that's not indicative of how my speech is going to go. But I will keep it short because I know I am the last one here. Just want to say thank you again, all of you, for having me here as one of your sons, as a son of Africa, as an African. I came to Africa because, one, your problems are my problems, and vice versa. We no longer live in a vacuum. We do not live in our silos, so no matter what region we're from. We live in this global economy, an economy that impacts upon all of us in similar ways. We have much more in common than we have in differences. As you are looking in your region at the problems and the effects of climate change, that's ultimately going to impact on all of us. As we as legislators start looking at how do we find opportunities for the people that we serve, that impacts on all of us. Because as legislators, we have a responsibility to do two things, not promises we can't keep, but two things, and that is to enhance that gave us the responsibility to represent them in our various chambers, and also to enrich their lives, and that is bringing home those projects, bringing home those dollars. As pointed out in my bio, I've been in office for 28 years, and in those 28 years I've represented over a million people. So there is a community, my community changes every 10 years, that continuously puts me back into position to work for them. Of those 28 years, for 17 years, I oversaw a $56 billion budget, looking to ensure that not only did my community receive and be the beneficiaries of that, but what allowed me to stay in that position was, as mentioned before about a professor, is I built partnerships, I built relationships. So my being here now in Nigeria is a continuum of us building relationships. Because we as legislators, which is one, not only are we of the same blood, but it's the same job that we have. We have the job and the responsibility to, one, first, to correct the atrocities of colonialism. We have the responsibility to correct the ills of racism that still are part of our community. We are both new at this process. You as a relatively new independent country, and we as relatively new but still fighting racism in our country. We can correct those things and go further if we work together. We have to also, the second thing as legislators, we must create opportunities for our people. We have to see opportunities, again, by, one, working with others, because you can't do nothing alone. I'm sure all of you that are members of Parliament have discovered that already, because this is a democracy. You need other people's votes. You need other people's support to do whatever you do. So we have to not only correct those atrocities, create opportunities, but it's also our job to create a world today that's going to be better tomorrow for our children. And that's what we do as legislators. And if you haven't found out yet, and if you thought it was the truth, that being a legislator was all about just going to cocktail parties, then you were wrong. If you thought being a legislator was being loved by everybody, and just by the fact that you're now called the honorable something or the other, was going to ingratiate you with individuals throughout your community, well, I know now, you know, that's wrong. Our best friends, and could be our worst enemies, are our constituents. If you do not do those another three things to ensure that you have transparency so that they know what you're trying to do, not what you've done or what you can't do tomorrow, but what you're trying to do, and that you're working diligently in that regard, then you're not going to have them as your friends. If you do not present to them accountability by going back, you're telling them again and again and working with them and getting their ideas, because what got you elected is that you promised them that you would be their voice and you would be their face in those halls of power. You promised them, and they're holding you accountable. So you must first be accountable to them, and you must be responsive to their requests. You have to, especially in this era that we're living in now, you have to answer those emails. And I don't have just always have to knock on their door, but you have to answer those emails, answer that phone, and you also have to walk amongst them. You no longer can just get in a big limousine and drive down the street and believe or feel that they understand that you're in a hurry. Everybody needs your attention. Everybody expects your attention because you promised that when you were running. You promised that you would be there for them. You promised them another 3 things. You promised them that what you would do, importantly, was you were going to give them an education system. You're going to work in an education system that ensured they were competitive with not everyone in the next region, but around the world. Competitive with those students in Britain. Competitive with students and people looking for jobs from the United States and other parts of the world. You promised that. You've also promised them that we were going to deal with the malaria problem. We're going to deal with our health care problems. You promised them that you were going to try to take the opportunity to not imprison them in our public safety network, but find, if it was necessary, mental health services for them. But what you didn't tell them was that was going to cost them money, and it was going to have to take a lot of hard work, and you're going to have a lot of partners to be there with you. So as you heard from so many others, that it is important, it is incumbent upon us to keep the expectations not low, but real. Understanding that change does not come overnight. Understanding that change can come if you all work together and continue to work together. I heard, as one of the speakers earlier, I think it was the Speaker of the National Assembly, who spoke one about Dan Rostenkowski, who was a congressman from Illinois, from the United States. Well, it just happens to be the congressman from my own community. So the 4 years and how he brought back pork barrel projects. Well, as you know, nothing wrong with pork barrel projects. We have to, just sort of look at it different. It's only foul and disgusting if you didn't get none. There are some people that those pork barrel projects, those are the things that actually makes it a better community. Those pork barrel projects is what is expected. There is an expectation that you're going to get your roads fixed. There is an expectation that everybody should have affordable housing, that everyone should have a base from which they can start their days and their mornings before they go to work. And that brings it to the other. There's an expectation that work will be created, jobs will be created, not only jobs in any other market, but jobs, working to fix those potholes. You have an expectation that it'll be your neighbors, or it can be you filling those holes. There's an expectation upon all of us. And we can learn how to make that happen. Or we should be working to make that happen even more by assuming and ensuring that we're all part of the process. So there were a lot of lessons learned here today. A lot of positive things, and I know the last speakers have talked about, again, being responsive to the community. And it certainly can be in there. But also, remember, as I said when I first started speaking, that none of us work in a vacuum. To get things done, to get things moving, we have to embrace each other's another district's things that are important to them. And then with that, you will get the reciprocity of people reaching back and helping you achieve your goals as well. We have a lot of work to do, but as you found out as being a legislator, that's not what you signed up as know what to do. We have a lot of work to do because that is another one of the promises that we made, that as people slept, we'll be working. As people cried, we'll be caring. As people die, that we will be insured, that we will help them, not out of our own pockets, but creating a government, creating an opportunity to which all of us can go to and be the beneficiaries of all God's riches. Because that's what's been held back from us. That's what other governments have done to us. Those things that are important to us, the riches of the world, the fruitfulness of the world that we live in has, for so many years, held back from us. Government works only if you make it work for you. So, as legislators, we need to be again more responsive to the people, more accountable to individuals, and certainly more transparent for our constituents. You need to come up front. You need to talk to us. And if we're going to be a government, if we're going to have a government, a world government, a democratic government of the people, by the people, and for the people, it's going to take all of us. So I look forward to continuing my conversations while I'm here in Nigeria and for years to come. And again, I look forward to the dialogue between all of us to make this a better world for all of us to live and grow old in and see our grandchildren grow up in. Thank you.
I'd like us to please give him another resounding applause for it actually gives us the opportunity to also learn from their experience, because we believe that our democracy is tailored after theirs and modeled after theirs. And so there's a need for this kind of constant interaction. And I would like us to please give to all the presenters a very big round of applause. We are handing up very big. Mr. Chairman, we've gotten to a point where we begin to interact. We've sat down here listening to all the series of presentations, and I know that very many of you would want to make some remarks, or rather comments, or also would want to ask questions where necessary. And so we will ask the Chairman, yes sir, before then, I think Mr. Chairman has something to say. Mr. Chairman? Let's listen to Alhaji Yanga. There's a round of applause for him.
We have two programs this week. One is the graduate session, and the other one is the community. And some of the participants are done funding in terms of breaking anytime around 7 o'clock. So those who are going to make comments should please bear this in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And that sets the stage for the interactive session. The Chairman will still sit here as the Chairman, but to conduct these aspects of the interactive is the Right Honourable Speaker and Chairman Conference of Speakers, Kebbi State House Assembly, who is represented by the Speaker, Abia State House Assembly, Right Honourable Barrister Martin Azubuike. So we'll take the interactive now, and we must take into cognizance, just as the Chairman said, we must take into cognizance time so that we make our contributions as brief as possible so we can allow for our brothers and sisters to go for the break and fast. I'll hand over the microphone to Honorable Azubuike to direct us on how to go about this. Thank you.
comments on the unnecessary pressure that is exerted on members. It's very clear that we have two constituency projects. One is visible in terms of practical infrastructure that you can think that you can see. The other is not visible, and in our case, is not a product of any promise. And some members have been pushed to the extent of collecting bank loans to meet up with these pressures. Nobody in his good senses, no politician, can promise that, okay, vote me. After voting me, I'll be giving you rights. I'll take care of your medical bills. When your marriage delivers, I'll be the one who the naming ceremony. When you have financial difficulties, I will be responsible for it. And when there is no food in your house, I'll provide it. This is practically what we are going through. And it has become a tradition laid down by our professors. From the place where I come from, this is the Baptist system. You must, whatever you are doing, you must provide life. You are saved not only by the project you will be able to attach to the constituency, but also by your ability to dish out money and solve such related problems. Your money has done it. In a situation where you are not able to meet up, you are portrayed as very, very keen. How do we get out of this problem? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's come to the next row. Nobody on this aisle, please. Yes, the gentleman there in the sports row this way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I still want to remain on the existing protocol. Just to add to the pet talk.
Your name, sir?
My name is Honorable Barrister Victor Ode, representing Dr. Constituency 1, Lagos State House of Assembly. To add to what my Honorable have just said, some people, when they announce that you are chairman committee of some of the House committee, they see you as being the rightful person that will deal with the money from that committee or that aspect of the ministries. And they're forgetting that it is just an assigned function that you have to carry out. And much is expected from that particular angle. And this is not just something you inflict on yourself, but that is the psyche of our people. They believe that once you are in the National Assembly or the National Assembly, that place is the money-making machine. How do we go about it, sir?
Okay, next row. Mr. Chairman, sir, I'm Nyanga from Plateau State. It's a request anyway, and maybe some comments. This discussion has been very want to have a strong democracy, I think the executive should be doing their own part, or the legislators should do their own part. And again, we are having situations in the country where the democratic process has not been up to the grassroots. We have some local government elections not being held even up to now. And we have to really synergize to make sure these projects are well supervised, so that we, by the time we are communicating with the National Assembly members, projects that are started in our places and ours. We have the chairman in place who says that's very well and make sure these things are well supervised, but the government in place told us that the rule of law, but the local government makes sure that issues are being on ground. So we want to have a proper with them, so that we can make sure these gray areas are dealt with. I want to rest my case. Okay, thank you on that observation. I'm sure members of the executive arm were invited to this summit. Maybe the DG needs to be thrown more light on this during the answer session. Any other, the last row? Okay, can you give to the lady on the next row?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the High Table. I just wanted to actually make a comment.
For the records, your name, ma'am.
Okay, my name is Honorable Zonal, and I'm from the Benue House of Assembly. More often than not, one of the things we as legislators have been faced with is the fact that a lot of the bill, especially the appropriation bill, comes from the executive. They're the ones who sit down and do a lot of the input before they send it to the legislators. Now, my comment is this. A lot of the challenges we face is also the fact that we are not meant to be putting an input before it's brought for legislation in terms of discussion. It would have been perfect, and I think the Honorable Speaker made that comment, it would have been really perfect when these conferences are drawn and the executive are made to be there and also to be contributors, because a lot of the mistakes begin from them before they come to the house, and then most often we try to deliberate on this and send it back, but we don't get what we want. So my comment would be, beginning from now, so that we don't put ourselves into the challenges we have, because we do have the challenges, legislators. It would be nice to get the executive to be part of this process, this discussion process, part of the community, and part of the thought going forward from today. Otherwise, we'll still be facing the same challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, there's a lady way behind. The lady in black.
Thank you for the consideration. I have listened to so many papers. My thank God, I enjoy so much about it.
Could you please tell us your name?
My name is Aisha Gitman.
From which assembly?
From National Assembly. Okay. But I am here champion of small government. I'm representing a civil organization called Women in the Hour. So my own concern is I have had several representatives complaining of the community coming to them for every need. But me being a representative we have to be realistic because we want to solve this problem and one pass dividends of the people. Actually, this type of democracy, the interaction between the community and the leaders is very, very minimal. But we pray that in this type of conference or summit, you improve the relationship between the government and the government. Thank you.
Thank you. We take two more. Okay, speaker, can come to the front and give to Mr. Speaker, straight to the point. No preambles, please.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to go back to the challenges that the governor has pointed out. Why is oversight functions not taking place? It's because the project that the government is doing for our constituencies is very small. It's not goes to all the communities on the continent. That's a constituency project. If you have been given a chance to go to your various communities. Also, the challenges we met, we take that our constituency office. That is why how this come to the city hall. So in Nigeria, you must have three offices at the level. Your house is your office. Your legislative office is your office. Also your constituency office is your office. You have. So bear in mind that in Nigeria, even you have the constituency office, don't think that your house will not become as your office or your organizing room. It's also your organizing room for the people of your constituency. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we take the man in white here, then the honorable member lady, then we need to take the responses. After him, the lady, then the responses. Yes, go ahead.
Chairman, allow me to please stand on the protocol. My name is Lawal Abdullahi, Executive Chairman, Parliament of the Local Government, Zamfara State. All said and done, I'm going that we should try and see how the National Assembly and state assemblies can make become committees that will be able to synergize with the members of the press so that the electorate will key into the change agenda. We have agreed all that we need change in this country. And this change cannot be made by only one person. So the committees will be responsible for educating and sensitizing the people of Nigeria that they should key into the anti-corruption agenda. And that they should not be encouraging the legislators or even the executive members. Because what the National Assembly and State Assembly members are facing, the executives too are facing the same thing. So I think it is a national problem. And I think a holistic approach should be taken and people will continue projects they don't have money to give out. And I have a question for Senator Ali. I wanted to know if the constituency projects in the US are being funded by the government, or it is only the individuals that they seek maybe to undertake that they will help in the execution of the project that does the work, or there is any input from the US government. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Finally, the lady there. Thank you very much. When Constituency was speaking, your name please. I'm Honorable Dr. Blessing Wow. I represent Alabama Constituency, Adet County. When Dr. was speaking, he did talk about the acceptance or the prominence of CDS in many democracies of today. You know, the number of countries practicing this has increased tremendously. That was to establish or support the fact that the core function of the legislature, which is not in the Constitution, that is what I describe as that of human infrastructure. That is different from that of legislation, different from that of oversighting, that of different from mobility. It will be highly appreciated as one that is highly needed by our constituents. While that is happening, while that of the smart infrastructure was there before now, the CDS is just imagined as well. I want to say that this should be legislated upon by various states and has been said by a number of speakers here. But while that is happening, we should engage in serious advocacy to let our constituents know the basic functions of the legislature, because I think ignorance is one of the problems. Many of them don't really appreciate or understand the functions of the legislature, those three basic functions. Here in Nigeria, they appreciate that fourth function, which is the handout we give to them. Then this other one now is coming up where government actually sponsors programs or projects in your constituency is going to be highly appreciated. But I think there is need for us to embark on some form of advocacy, sensitization, publicity, more of it about our activities and our responsibilities. Because while we see the data like that, I think a number of them would understand if we embark on this. So that's my contribution. Thank you for very wonderful comments and observations and questions. Let the responses and if there is time, we will entertain yours. Just hold on for now. We'll begin with Dr. Rashid Rahman. The line very close to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think most of the contributions were comments, except a few. The one that asked about how members of parliament can get out of the quagmire of these invisible services that they provide in the constituency. You know, the story that I gave about Malawi, at the end of that discussion, the town hall meeting that we had, what members of parliament said was that if you don't make the promise, your opponent will make the promise and then the people will vote for him and they will not vote for you. So we said that there's a need for some kind of ceasefire or some kind of rule of engagement so that members of parliament aspiring across the different parties will agree that there are certain promises that do not have to be made. So that way everybody is campaigning on issues and not campaigning on promises that are not fulfilled. Having said that, I know and I understand and I share the concern of the honorable member that even if you don't make the promises, still people will come after you and they will need you to provide certain services. And again, this one takes me back to my anecdote about how in Canada, today people don't ask for those kind of services, but they ask for maybe issues about legislation and so on. It's a function of development. And how you break this developmental challenge, I think will begin with how resources are allocated and how resources are used. In most countries in Africa, on average, they say that about 30% of the national budget disappears into private pockets. I don't know what the percentage here is in Nigeria, but in most countries in East and South Africa, they say 30% of their budget disappears. So, what is intended for healthcare doesn't get the people to provide healthcare. So when you show up there, you are a very easy scapegoat, and people are going to crowd on you and they are going to ask you to help them out. Until we are able to break that challenge, even with the CDF, the Constituency Project Funds, you are still going to have those challenges. Because those funds are not going to be able to meet everybody's needs. I heard very clearly about the need for the executive to be part of this. I think that is very laudable because then you can have very good discussion. But unfortunately, all the people that came from the executive, as I observed, as soon as they finished their presentation, they left few members of parliament. And I think that doesn't make very good for kind of constructive conversation. Then the other one is the role of the media, which I think is very important. And then there was a comment about the National Assembly or the members seen as the Assembly seen as a money-making kind of machine. And many people argue that it is because also of the kind of what people see from the outside in terms of the lifestyle, in terms of how our honorable members across the continent, how they carry themselves. And so if people don't have a very good understanding, then all of a sudden they see you from an ordinary person, they see the next day you are riding a big car, they don't understand that big car is supposed to be used for the services in the constituency, is supposed to be used to help you in carrying out your duties. They misinterpret that to mean that as soon as you just see the house, there's a pot of money from which you fetch and then you can do anything that you want. And that brings a lot of challenge to you as an elected member. I think the rest are challenges that members identify themselves with, and I sympathize with those challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rashid. I'm sure you are taking care of some of the concerns that came up in this interactive session. Let me come very quickly to the senator from the U.S. The question on whether the U.S. government makes any inputs in CDF or do the funds come from MPs alone? The question came from the floor as to whether in your jurisdiction, the U.S. government does it make input into CDF, that's Constituency Development Fund, or do the monies come from members of parliament alone?
No,
done this for a number of years, I have a strong feeling that we should really be able to conduct some research and opinion polls about what we have done in terms of community projects, constituency projects in this country. And then we can use evidence arising from that, in order to build a form of that process. We really need to find out what has been done, what is the perception of residents of this project at community level, what they think of their legislators in terms of the handling, and also issues around ownership and sustainability. I think we can learn a lot from that in during the future of CDS and Nigeria.
Thank you, Prof. Honorable, I think it's been very worthwhile. Let me at this juncture thank each and everyone first for the contributions you've made, and more importantly, for being in this session until this moment. I want to believe you've been very much enriched and ready and willing to go home with all the insights we've received from this summit today to continue to impact positively on our constituencies. The advocacy we need to carry on at the level of the media, at the level of the CSOs, the committees we need to put in place to ensure proper implementation of the objectives of this summit. But before we conclude on this session, let me quickly give this slide to DG to throw more light on the involvement of the members of the executive branch in activities and fora like this to bring a much needed synergy in the implementation of outcomes of summits like this. You will recall that this summit is being facilitated by DG News, collaborating with the National Assembly, and the DG is here. Let's hear from her what has been done and what needs to be done to ensure that the major stakeholders are in subsequent outings like this. DG, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, distinguished participants, for your patience so far. I think the only comment I can make is that the National Assembly has continuously engaged the executive arm of government in this project, but there are normally series of negotiations during the budget season, and eventually an agreement is reached before the budget is passed. However, for this particular summit, we are aware that the executive branch of government fully participated, from the vice president, the ministers, the secretary of government administration. All of them are very busy people. There's other commitments. I think the most important thing is what message they came here with. So it is up to the National Assembly, particularly the Honorable Speaker of the House of Representatives, now to map out a way forward by establishing some kind of a committee that will include the executive and draw up some concrete blueprint that will guide us in the future in medium and development so they can continue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so very much, DG News. One last comment. There's a question for us here about local government elections being conducted. This is outside our brief, and we don't intend to attend to it. MC, please, we are done in this session. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Chairman of the session and Speaker of the State House of Assembly, as well as the Vice Chairman of the Conference of Speakers of State Legislatures of Nigeria. Thank you so very much for interactive session. Let's appreciate the chairman of the session with a big round of applause, a rounding one. Thank you. You will agree with me that he has done well while presiding over the session. Thank you so very much. He is used to presiding sessions as a speaker. Thank you. We also thank the paper presenters talking about Dr. Lani Hamalai and Professor Sam Ebo, and also thank Dr. Draman, as well as the Senator from Illinois, Senator Tora, and other distinguished personalities. We thank you so very much for making this session a wonderful one. And now, before we finally close the session, may I call on the Committee on Communique. The Communique Committee members should please come up here. The chairman of the committee is Honorable Lawal Abubakar Garba. Lawal Abubakar Garba is the chairman of the House of Representatives Committee on Constituency Outreach. So he is going to be presenting the communique on behalf of other members, but I would like to have the other members of the communique stand with him as he presents. If they are around, if they are not, I think he is here and he can handle it. Okay. Prof is the secretary, is he around? Prof is good. And the chairman of Maru Local Government Area of Zamfara State is also a member. And the Speaker of Rivers State House of Assembly is here around. If he is around, he should also come up. He is also a member of the Communique Committee. So now I hand over to the chairman of the Communique Committee to read out the communique. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, permit me to stand on the existing protocol. Before I read the communique, I would like to make a statement that democracy, to some extent, it is flexible. All what we are talking about is maybe to legalize some of these institutions. What the executive are saying that probably maybe we are doing the job of the executive. If you look at the Constitution of Nigeria, it is flexible. There will be a time when the executive can do the job of even the judiciary, like the prerogative of mercy. You can see the president or the governor can go to a prison yard and free some inmates. And likewise, you will see a legislator at times will be doing the job of the executive. When he sends either a bill and it is the veto, he will come and it will be brought back to the House, and then that will be passed into law. So the legislature is also making the job of an executive. And likewise, the judiciary, when there is no law, at least it is allowed. You can see Lord Denny, in a number of cases, he passed some pronouncements, judicial pronouncements, and that is law. So it is something that we can sit down on the table and then iron it together. So I now read the communique of this committee. The House of Representatives and the Conference of Speakers, in conjunction with the National Institute of Legislative Studies, organized a one-day national summit on political representation and constituency and zonal intervention services at the International Conference Center, Abuja, on Monday, June 20, 2016. The summit was attended by the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Right Honorable Yakubu Dogara, and members of the House of Representatives, speakers and members of the House of Assemblies, local government chairmen, and Speaker of Kenyan Parliament. The opening session, the opening ceremony of the event had in attendance the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Professor Emi Osibanjo, represented by Senator Femi Ojudu, his Special Assistant on Political Affairs. The Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Engineer David Babachir Lawal, the Minister of Power, Works and Housing, His Excellency Raji Fashola, SAN. In addition, resource persons were drawn from both within Nigeria and outside, including Senator Trota from Illinois and Senator David from Kansas, a senator from the United States of America, who were knowledgeable about the management of community projects and CDF. Participants at the summit observed as follows. 1. Despite legal and constitutional controversies surrounding constituency projects driven by elected legislators, implementation of the constituency projects through constituency development funds has grown by convention and practical exigency to become critical elements of delivering development services and infrastructure to the people. 2. The growing importance of CDF as instrument of promoting development is attested by the fact that over 20 countries in developed and emerging democracies have established one form of CDF or the other with varying institutional framework and arrangements. 3. The imperative of even, equitable and balanced distribution of infrastructure and public good in Nigeria's plural and diverse political setting continues to be a major source of attraction and legitimacy for constituency projects, while effective implementation of constituency projects shore up the political image of the executive, the legislature, and the party in power. 4. Available evidence suggests that countries such as Kenya and Jamaica were clearly defined with clearly defined legal framework for implementation of CDFs, have used them as a tool for responding to development and service delivery needs of constituents compared to countries such as Uganda and Nigeria, where such legal frameworks are either weak or absent. 5. A common source of concerns in the implementation and management of constituency projects is the tendency to ascribe to such projects to individuals, legislators, rather than to constituents, to the extent that when such legislator fails in the re-election bid, while such projects are yet to be completed, they end up being abandoned. 6. Weak synergy between different tiers of government makes it very difficult to mobilize the necessary energies and oversight framework that will make constituency projects more amenable to public accountability and sustainability. 7. Constituency projects have huge potential in assisting federal and state governments in Nigeria to meet developmental needs of citizens, provided there is a reform of the management structure and framework. Then we come to the recommendations. On the basis of the foregoing observations, participants made a number of recommendations as follows. 1. The popular perception of legislators as development agents, beyond the routine task of lawmaking and oversight on the one hand, and the need to decentralize development in Nigeria's diverse political settings on the other, have entrenched constituency projects as irreversible development initiatives in many democracies, including Nigeria. 2. It is important to provide a robust legal framework and mechanisms to promote greater transparency, accountability, effectiveness, and sustainability in the use of CDFs as instruments of development and advancement of collective public good. 3. Deliberate effort should be made to ensure that while constituency project initiatives are driven by legislators, projects are owned by constituents rather than legislators, to guarantee that such projects are completed even when a particular legislator failed in his or her re-election bid. 4. Honorable Speaker of the House of Representatives is called upon to set up a committee to draw up a legal framework for the consideration of the National Assembly, drawing from the discussions and resolutions during this summit. 5. Efforts should be made to build a greater community ownership of infrastructure and service delivery through CDF through a participatory process in which constituents are involved in identifying their priority needs and are involved in the implementation and monitoring of the projects. 6. There is urgent need to deepen cooperative federalism in Nigeria and to ensure greater synergy between the different levels of government, considering their overlapping jurisdictions in the delivery of infrastructure and services. In addition, constituency projects, whether it is in the exclusive or concurrent legislative list, must be implemented through the collaboration of the executive and the legislature once appropriated and becomes law. 7. Evidence based on research on the performance and impact of constituency projects implemented so far is needed to inform the reform and design of constituency projects, funds, management and implementation in Nigeria. Distinguished participants, Chairman, this is what so far the community is. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you very much. The Community Committee have done a yeoman's job, and we need to applaud them. Let's put our hands together for them. And then we throw it back to you by simply asking, in the course of taking the committee, because we don't all have copies, is there any observation? Because this is the time for us to possibly cross the T's and dot the I's, and then of course we can make corrections where necessary before action. If there are no observations, either grammatical or otherwise, we have 2 hands up. Can we have the microphones? 3. We'll take these 3 kind of quick interventions now. Can we have the microphones? The 3 hands that were up? Yes, on that row, 1. And then we have 1 man here as well. Okay, no need. Okay, just 1 hand. That hand. Minister.
Recommendation 4. I think it was generally advised and agreed that every member should identify a project that will just cover its own tailing within 3-4 years. Anything outside should not affect the acceptable. And on recommendation 4, as if it was captured to exceed its own tailing. Chairman.
I think you might be talking about recommendation 3, perhaps so, and not 4. All right, Honorable.
You have a copy of
No. Let me just pick recommendation 3. Recommendation 3 here says deliberate efforts should be made to ensure that while constituency projects, initiatives are driven by the legislators, projects are owned by constituents rather than legislators to guarantee that such projects are completed even when a particular legislator fails in his or her re-election bid. Is that right? Yes, this is recommendation 3. So what do you say we should add? Is sustained. Okay, thank you very much. Any other observation? Yes, sir.
Yes. When the Minister of Power was named and the very important personality was neglected, Minister of Communication was not mentioned.
As attending the summit. Okay, Minister of Power and Minister of Communications. Mr. Raji Babatunde Fashola, SAN, and then Alhaji Rafiu Shitu. Right? That's right. The 2 of them are not. Power is captured. Okay. So, they will include Adebayo Shitu, Minister for Communications. Okay, please, let's quickly, hence the microphone still here. Can somebody please move for the adoption? And then we get a seconder. There are so many hands up, so it depends on where the microphone goes to. Okay, we'll have him move.
I, Honorable President Tuition Makudin, from Lagos State House of Assembly, hereby move for the adoption of the
Thank you. Let's get the seconder. There's a hand up here on the first row. I'll just mind that. All right. Now that we have a seconder, voice vote, those of you who are in agreement that the communique is as stands adopted, say aye. Those against, say nay. The ayes have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so very much. We appreciate you all. Thank you so much. Mr. Chairman of the session, Speaker, and Abia State House of Assembly, I want to thank you so very much. Our resource persons from Senator Don Chora, I'd like to thank you, Donnie. We also want to thank the Honorable Chairman, Committee Chairman from the House of Representatives, Honorable Garba, thank you. Dr. Jaman, thank you so very much. And of course the other senator from the USA, all the speakers, we thank all of you. I want to wish you journey blessings to your respective destinations. And please let's just rise, and then we'll just take the national anthem and bring this to a close. If you have the national anthem ready, please remember your valuables. National anthem, please. Okay, we might have to sing it. Okay, let's recite it, but please don't play again, eh? Don't bother. We're going to sing it and recite it with all excitement. 1, 2, 3, go. Arise, O compatriots, Nigeria's calling to serve our fatherland with love and strength and faith. The labor of our heroes past shall never be in vain. To serve with heart and mind, one nation bound in freedom, peace and unity. Thank you very much and wish you a very pleasant evening. And for our brothers and sisters fasting, wish you a happy break of fast and enjoy your meals when the time comes. Thank you so very much.
That's my document. Okay, good. Yes.
It was really nice meeting you.
Distinguished Senator, thank you very much.
My name is spelled correctly.
Okay. Okay.
No problem. I didn't want to
we have to check because seriously, I know it is an actually.
Right,
honored
I was coming last week.
I don't know. I can hear from you. Yeah, I know. I came flexible.